Before we get into today's episode, I need to give you a proper heads up about what we're covering because this one is really, really important. It's heavy and it does need to be said. So, this is just a little bit of a trigger warning and a disclaimer before we start. In this episode, I discuss rape, sexual abuse, domestic violence, misogyny, and injustices related to football, including real cases, real statistics, and real women whose stories deserve to be heard. If any of these topics are something that you are personally navigating right now, or if you feel this content may be triggering for you, please take care of yourself and do not feel any pressure to proceed with listening to this episode. If you or someone that you know needs help and support with any of the issues that we discussed today in this episode, please reach out to Rape Crisis England and Wales on their free 24/7 helpline at 0808 500 2222. We have the National Domestic Abuse Helpline with Refuge charity on 0808 2000 247. They're available for free 24/7. You can also reach out to charities like Solace Womens Aid and Safe Lives. In an emergency, please always ring 999. And there is an app called the Hollyguard app, which is a free personal safety app that I would encourage every woman to download in light of this episode. This episode is being released in light of Side Note's fundraiser for Solace Womens Aid for the World Cup to stop abuse from coming home. They're a charity doing absolutely incredible and vital work, supporting women and girls who experience domestic abuse and sexual violence. We have a Just Giving page, links in this description and in our social media bios. You can also just go to Just Giving and type in Side Note and we should come up straight away. If you donate through our page, all donations go directly to Solace Women's Aid, and all donations, even a small amount, can make such a difference to real women's lives. This episode is not just a conversation, it's a reminder of why fundraisers just like this one exist and why we should do more to raise awareness around these issues that go on behind closed doors. I'm glad you're here, and if you have stuck around, thank you so much for your support. Let's get into the main episode. Hello and welcome to Side Note. It's your weekly tangent and your unfiltered chat with Amber Hannah. This episode is being released in light of our fundraiser with Solace Women's Aid, as I mentioned in the intro. If you have stuck around for it, thank you so much for your support. Basically, what I want to do with this episode is help to raise more awareness around issues that go on all of the time behind closed doors, discuss a little bit around the reality of these issues, especially in light of the World Cup, which actually aggravates things like domestic abuse so much. Obviously, in this episode, we are going to be discussing domestic abuse, sexual violence, and also the dark reality of football and the World Cup in terms of these issues, which, when you do look deeper into it, is quite harrowing, the reality of it. I think that the level of issues with this around the World Cup and actually in the World Cup in relation to players really can show you the harsh reality of societal views and the level of acceptance of the darkest issues that go on behind closed doors. So I want to just give some statistics to kind of start off around domestic abuse more generally and the reality of that in relation to the World Cup. So in the year 2024 to 2025, 2.2 million women were victims of domestic abuse. 1 in 3 women will experience domestic abuse from the age of 16. 72% of all victims were female in the last year alone. Every 30 seconds, the police receive a call in relation to domestic abuse. That means that since this has been recording, there's been around 13 phone calls to the police just around domestic abuse. So where does football come into this, and how does it really worsen things? Domestic abuse cases rise by 38% when England fans' favourite team lose a football match. Domestic abuse rises by over a quarter even when they win. There is an 11% rise in abuse the day after a football match takes place. And there is one study that found that alcohol-related domestic abuse cases actually rise by 50% after England win. After they win. I want to reiterate, that is after they win a match, a literal celebration. And I also want to reiterate about all of these numbers that these are only the numbers that we know about. These are the cases that have been reported. So what goes on behind closed doors? And why do so many go unreported? So I want to kind of raise awareness around domestic abuse cases more generally, the outcome for a lot of women, and rape cases specifically, because this is something that I studied in quite a lot of detail years ago for my degree. And unfortunately for me at the time, I also went through a case myself and pulled out before it could get to a trial. And I think that these figures show exactly why myself, among other women that do go through these issues, why they don't progress. So from the Office of National Statistics and Rape Crisis data, 16% of rape cases are reported. So 84% of cases do not even get reported. Reporting it is different to going to trial. So as it happened in my case, when I reported what was going on with me, think about how many other women might report it, but then drop out down the line because they fear going to trial. They fear what the outcome's going to be. And you can't blame women, right? Because only 3% of cases actually get justice. And the majority of cases actually, when they go to trial, do far more harm than good. They put women at more risk. The jury is in a position where they can essentially objectify women, as is done in the media throughout history. So to reiterate there, that means that 97% of cases do not get justice. When we look at the reality of the situation and we wonder why women don't speak up, women don't use their voice, women don't progress with these cases, women don't report it, the evidence is there as to why. We can't blame women for not coming forward. And I have seen a lot of positive change around this and a lot more women speaking up. Obviously, what happened with me was years ago. But at the time for me, it was about assessing whether that trial for me to go through that would actually have done me more harm than it would good. And with 73% of victims saying it actually worsened their mental health and their healing from the situation when they did progress with their case, it makes you kind of reflect and wonder, that maybe this is why women don't speak up so much. And some of the other Office for National Statistics data on rape specifically is that 40% of women said that they would be embarrassed. 38% said that they didn't think the police would help them. 34% felt absolutely humiliated. And a quarter of victims thought the police wouldn't believe them even if they tried. There are so many victims that have fear of not being believed, but then we have to question, well, why is that? Because society is set up for women to keep their mouths shut, for women to look out for men, overlook things and not question things. And again, this is kind of where so much justice isn't even served at the trial, because societal views, whether they are in your subconscious or, whether you consciously think them, society is literally programmed to instantly go against women. So you've got the jury there representing society. How do you think that outcome is for many women that do actually have to go to trial? And, a lot of women that go through domestic abuse on the whole specifically blame themselves because they've gone through probably years of abuse and gaslighting, manipulation, control, coercion to the point where they've literally been kind of programmed to think that's their fault or that's all they're worthy of. So when you kind of ask a woman to leave that situation or to speak up and move forward, that is a lot easier said than done. Another statistic which I found really, really upsetting and harrowing to even think about, but it really does show the reality of this situation, concerning to even think about, but it really does show the reality of the situation as to, first of all, why women don't leave, why women don't speak up, and not only what the outcome is in terms of their case, but actually a far more darker outcome is that 888 women were killed by a partner or an ex-partner between 2009 and 2018. In 43% of those cases, they had either separated or taken steps to separate from the perpetrator. That means that nearly half of the women killed were killed for trying to leave. Again, in terms of like allegations around abuse and rape cases, it's said by researchers that only 2 to 4% of cases are actually false allegations. So how does that 2 to 4% align with the fact that only 3% of rape cases, for example, actually get the justice that they need? Does that 2 to 4% of false allegations allegedly in any way, can that in any way be extrapolated to the fact that 97% of cases do not get any level of justice that they deserve? Again, and in terms of wider context, especially with domestic abuse, you've got the perpetrator and the victim being in a relationship of some kind, and in that, it happens behind closed doors. No one's there. There's no one really to give evidence necessarily on this. It's quite hard to prove. And when you've got so many women living in fear of their partner, for example, about if they did report anything, there's rarely like that paper trail that you need. And again, with rape cases, a lot of them happen behind closed doors. They're very, very hard to actually gather evidence on, and rarely will the perpetrator actually speak out and say that they did in fact do that. A lot of the time it's just that in terms of the evidence side, they are very, very hard to prove. And this is why it's so unfortunate for so many women that have to go through these horrible, horrible crimes. The burden is then placed on the survivor to essentially prove their assault when they're already traumatized, already going through so much, probably terrified of the outcome, knowing really like in terms of the evidence side that could be quite difficult. So the reality of these situations is so upsetting to think about. And I want to talk about a little bit around the misogyny and level of injustices that can be found in football and the World Cup. So obviously what I was mentioning before around the level that those abuse cases actually go up when a football match takes place, when their favourite team is playing, when things like the Euros or the World Cup's on. Why do we overlook this? Well, when you actually go deeper, there is so much darkness to be found under the surface of players that are allowed to play in the World Cup, the level of acceptance of rape and abuse culture in the World Cup and in football as a whole. There are rapists that have literally played in the World Cup and no one's fucking talking about it. But why is that? Why do we accept abuse? Why do we accept rape and sweep it under the rug because it's football? And then we question why there's so much abuse increase around football matches and those people that support and literally worship these players. There is so much institutional protection in relation to status and money. So there is a dark reality of the, you know, how there's this narrative around, don't ruin a man's career. Oh my God, he does all this amazing stuff. She shouldn't be saying that. Like, she needs to keep her mouth shut. He's doing X, Y, Z. The reality is so dark. We essentially are silencing women because they would essentially ruin a man's career. We've got, as an example, Ghana's Thomas Partey is currently being charged with 7 counts of rape and 1 count of sexual assault relating to 4 different women. He's denied all of it, and his trial starts in June 2027. He played for Ghana against England a couple of weeks ago. Morocco's captain was just ordered to stand trial in France over an alleged 2023 rape. He's denied all allegations, and he's one of Morocco's most important players still on the pitch today. Kaishu Sano from Japan's team was also arrested in 2024 on suspicion of gang rape. Prosecutors dropped the case after his lawyers reached a settlement agreement with the woman involved and he issued an apology. He is now playing in the World Cup. Portugal's captain, sorry, not sorry, Cristiano Ronaldo, quite literally one of the most famous, if not the most famous footballers alive, was actually accused of rape in an incident in 2009 in a Las Vegas hotel room. No criminal charges were ever filed. In fact, prosecutors said in 2019 that too much time had passed to build a case. Ronaldo instead paid $375,000 in a 2010 confidentiality settlement to Catherine, his victim. He's always maintained the encounter that this was consensual and has spent years in court successfully keeping that settlement sealed. He's now leading Portugal at his 6th World Cup as we speak. When you think out those cases, there's a common theme in there of settlement agreement, which essentially is money to silence you. It's money to, okay, we'll settle this for a financial amount if you keep your mouth shut, basically. And when people are at this level of power, this level of money, what do you really think that victims are going to do in that situation? It's all around, this whole argument around accusations ruin men's lives, not when you're good at football, apparently. And that's the harsh reality of it. How could it ruin their life because they're so good at kicking around a fucking sack of air around a field? How could it? What a great guy. And, when you look at cases like we've got a gang rape case, we've got a case where there is 4 victims. 4 different victims. This is the reality of it. These people are playing in the World Cup. These people are accepted enough to play in the World Cup. So what does that tell society? Also, I know for a fact that a lot of these, I was shocked when I was doing my research around Cristiano Ronaldo. I hadn't heard about that. And it kind of makes you question, well, why haven't I heard about that? When a woman accuses a famous man, her entire life is scrutinised. But the media is so quick to highlight his performance, his charity work, his good character. They are all immediately brought to the table. So she must be lying because he raises money for charity. She must be lying because he's a great footballer. This is the harsh reality of what happens when women come forward, and media coverage always leans towards the man's career, the man's good deeds, what they're doing for society, what they're doing for charity, etc. That he's a family man, oh, he's great with his kids, all that jazz. And it prioritizes that narrative over the woman's trauma, over the evidence that the woman may have, over what the woman's been through. And then we wonder why society is so desensitized to this and why society doesn't lean towards believing the woman, because we're being brainwashed through the headlines, through social media, through the fact that these institutions literally allow rapists to play in the World Cup. It's literally ingrained at so many levels that it's hard to pull yourself out of that as a society. There was a case example of 2 high school football players that were convicted of raping an unconscious girl. When the verdicts came in, a CNN correspondent said on air that it was incredibly difficult, even for an outsider like me, to watch what happened as these 2 young men had such promising futures. They were star football players, such good students, and literally watched as they believed their lives have fell apart. There was not a word about the girl whose life had actually fallen apart. It was all centered around what a shame these students were excellent. What a shame they could have had such a great career ahead of them and she's ruined it. That's the dark reality of this situation. Again, so I mentioned a little bit earlier around, why does this go on and why do people get away with it? Obviously in football specifically, and especially with famous people, you have like the NDA and the settlement agreement culture. Again, what we mentioned with like Ronaldo and some of the other players, money literally will seal the truth away. Money will keep something behind closed doors. And if not, well, she could be at more risk. Can you imagine how terrified you would feel with someone with that level of power, where this is so overlooked and ingrained in that level of culture? What would happen if you rejected that? Settlements basically silence women and protect their reputation simultaneously. And again, like when we go back to if we take like the famous cases out of this a minute, the reality of the fear that women are already in, the embarrassment, the shame, the worry that nothing's going to happen anyway. Can you imagine the level of risk for a woman who's gone through a trial and let's say there wasn't enough evidence, or let's say that the jury didn't believe her at trial about someone, let's say, of the level of Cristiano Ronaldo, what that would mean for her future? And then we wonder why these things aren't reported. We wonder why justice isn't in place for this stuff. Again, there is so much institutional protection from football and, the clubs, federations and sponsors behind this industry that have enormous, massive financial incentive to protect their star players. There is so much money behind it. They will do anything to protect the narrative. Agents, legal team, PR firms are literally deployed immediately, with survivors rarely having any level of equivalent resources. The level of money in this stuff means a higher level of protection. That's the reality of it. Money is protection in these situations. I know that the discussion has been pretty tough. Like, I've found it tough to even talk about, but it's something that I feel so passionate about, and like, I want women that go through these things. I want women that go through domestic abuse to get the help that they deserve. And I think when we look at the reality of how embedded an acceptance of rape culture and abuse is, where it's literally weaved throughout football, and then we wonder why these men that literally worship football are acting in this way. It makes you question, like, is the system actually working? It might work financially, but is it working for people's lives? Like, it's so hard to even think about. And when you've got those statistics around, 50% of alcohol-related cases jump up. Again, like, alcohol is literally like the devil in these situations. That is in cases where they win. I just find it hard to even think about, especially when you hear that it's when they won a game. Winning is a celebration. Like, it's this level of anger and aggression that it causes in these men, and with alcohol and probably other substances, and what that chemical reaction causes in their brain, accompanied by their testosterone, accompanied by societal views that they've picked up about women, can explain why 97.5% of abusers in the last calendar year were men. It's embedded at every level from the inside out. Why I am raising money for Solace Women's Aid. So Solace is a leading violence against women and girls charity supporting thousands of survivors each year. They predominantly operate from London, and for over 50 years, they've supported women and children across London to build safe lives and futures away from male abuse and violence. At Solace, they believe that with our support, they can help to create a world where women and girls are free from fear, violence, and oppression. This World Cup, they've ran a lot of campaigns around the horrible statistics that are the reality of this situation in relation to football. And we want to just give support and say thank you by raising money to help women and girls that are affected by domestic abuse this World Cup. This goes beyond providing vital services, but it helps them to recover and thrive, and helps to contribute to prevention initiatives that actually stop abuse before it can occur. In 2004 to 25, Solace specifically supported over 17,000 adults and children in their frontline services alone. And they worked with another over 7,000 people in their prevention services. So they are doing work from every single angle to help support this even happening in the first place. They also provided accommodation services for 817 women and children that needed to get out of abusive situations. Solace also has an inclusive definition of women, including trans women, which is something that I absolutely love about this charity. Their services seek to support and represent trans women and non-binary people. Solace understands that trans women are also affected by misogyny and patriarchal frameworks that cause harm to women and girls. I also do want to just give note before we round off the episode to other amazing charities that are doing really, really great work aside from Solace. So Manchester Women's Aid, they do amazing work for Manchester-based women, and also Women's Aid that operates UK-wide. There's Refuge, which is the largest in the UK, and they help thousands of women across the UK on any given day. They do absolutely fabulous work. And again, I mentioned at the start, they do have a 24/7 helpline on 0808 2000 247. If you do need help again, you can also call Solace Women's Aid advice line on 0808 802 5565. They're available Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. and Tuesday, 6 a.m. till 8 p.m. You can also email in to advice@solacewomensaid.org. Solace also has a rape crisis helpline, which is available on 0808 801 0305. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this fundraiser episode. As I mentioned at the start, there is a Just Giving link in the description, which is there for you to donate via Just Giving if any of this has kind of struck a chord with you. If you want to help women that are going through domestic abuse, then any level of donation is really, really appreciated. And I just want to say thank you so much for listening. I know that episodes like this are on the heavier side and they can be quite triggering. Again, if anyone wants to reach out to me about any of these issues, I'm here to talk, here to help. And again, there are the helplines that I've discussed throughout the episode that are available to give specialist help that you might need. Or if you are thinking that someone else might need help, just please remember that the support is there. And it's important that we come together and hear women and support women throughout these times. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. There'll be a normal side note episode released on Wednesday, but I hope that this has helped to kind of raise a bit of awareness around the dark reality of football and the dark reality of domestic abuse. Thank you so much. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye.